The following is a conversation with James Bohr as part of my Infosec Sidekick podcast series. This episode was focused on cybersecurity talks and how to give a good one. James Bohr has a large amount of experience within the industry, and especially with giving cybersecurity talks. His tend to be pretty good, so I figured it would be a great idea to talk to him about the different types of success criteria and just his ideas around the culture and industry of giving cybersecurity talks. I know there are a lot of you out there, like myself, who are nervous to give a cybersecurity talk or are thinking about giving their first talk. If that's you, like it was me, I hope you find this conversation valuable because we do talk a lot about that theme. If you're a veteran at giving talks, there's always opportunities to get better, and I don't know if the nerves ever go away. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with James Bohr. If you'd like to listen to the entire podcast, visit infosecsidekick.com/podcast. All right. Hey, everyone. I'm here with James Bohr, my guest for this week. James is a cybersecurity professional. He owns his own family consulting company. They consult cybersecurity matters, and he's recently started a new gig. It's called Secure the Stage, where he specifically focuses on helping folks get ready to give presentations and cybersecurity talks. And I'm assuming it's not really relevant to whether you're doing cybersecurity talks or anything else because the subject matter is fairly consistent. But anyway, I'm really happy to have James on the show. James and I met each other a while ago, even though we're, I guess, on separate sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So I appreciate the show going, international at this point. So James, thanks so much for being here. If you want to give a little intro, maybe you can do it a little better than me.
Can do, or I'll try anyway. And cybersecurity professional, been in what is now called cybersecurity for a couple of decades in one way or another. Been standing on stages and boring people for a good 10 years now.
Boring people. I see what you did there. Okay. Very cool, man. So I wanted to start the conversation off, obviously we're going to go into places like how to give a good presentation, what are the kind of key success criteria we should be focusing on if we want to give a security talk. And then we're going to talk about, how we can apply that to generic, boring old corporate life. And maybe there are some things we can kind of pull from the cybersecurity talk world that we can implement there. But before we got into that, I know you mentioned you've been doing this for a little while, the whole security thing. Are you able to talk a little bit about and expand just a little bit about your career and how you got into security and what you've been doing over the past 10 plus years?
Can do. So I started out in the, let's say, early noughties, working in schools as a network manager. And that was a few years after the UK Data Protection Act 98 had come in. So that was the second one. It was the first one where data protection for computers was really considered, which meant that as the one person in a school of 200 teachers, 2,000 students, it all got dropped on my head. So that was how I started. People talk about a career trajectory. Mine was more pinball. Bouncing around different roles, software development, architecture, all sorts of different things over the couple of decades I was in it before I went independent. And covered I won't say everything, covered a lot over that time.
Very cool. Yeah, one of the things I've noticed from a lot of my peers who kind of got into cybersecurity at least like 10 to 15 years ago, not so much recently, is that you didn't really necessarily have much of a choice. It was more of like things were just kind of thrust upon you as the space was evolving. So it sounds like that was a very similar experience for you. So since this conversation is really focused around giving cybersecurity talks, I wondered if you could recall the first cybersecurity talk you gave, where that was, and just kind of how that went for you and what intrigued you and what made you do it.
So it was, I think over a decade ago now. Time blurs, but it was in a wine bar to an audience of about a dozen people, because it was an organizational event called a Cafe Scientifique, where people come in and talk about a scientific topic. And the speaker who was meant to be there wasn't available. So, with a couple of days' notice, the organizer said to me, "Can you come in and talk to our audience about security?" So I did. Absolutely terrified. There were no slides, no prompts, or anything like that. Standing in a wine bar, glass of wine in one hand, audience of people all sipping away, bit of chatter in the background, and then started telling them about it.
That's awesome. It sounds more of like maybe an open mic night with like slightly less preparation. How did it go?
It went well enough that the next day I was asked by someone to give a guest lecture at a local university. So suddenly I had to think things through and organise it and prepare for 2 hours to 500 students instead, which was a bit of a shift.
From wine bar to higher education, classic move there. Very cool, man. So, I wanted to pivot to why people should give cybersecurity talks. And maybe we can start that conversation by almost like retrospecting that mini scenario, right? So you were kind of thrust into this role as a speaker. You could talk about whether you really wanted to do it or not, or if you just kind of felt pressured or whatever, if that's relevant. But it opened clearly a door. And I was wondering what your thoughts on why people should consider giving a talk at like a cybersecurity conference or a smaller venue. What your thoughts around that might be.
So there's three reasons that I can think of off the top of my head. One is the reason I did that first one, which was because it scared me. And it's always worth expanding the comfort zone. So that was the main reason I went into it. The other two reasons are things I've come to realize since. So there's the personal reason, which is actually getting on stage, talking to people is incredibly powerful for yourself, to give you professional development, to showcase that you know what you're talking about or don't, but are willing to talk about it anyway and learn from it. So that's a huge reason for it. I know plenty of people who've given their first talk and then been dropped into the perfect role for them because someone found it, said, "Oh, this person's interested in the area I really need someone for right now." So it's a great advert. That's the selfish reason. The more altruistic reason is that I've got this theory that all talks, all presentations, they're done for really one purpose, which is to drive change in some way. And we've got plenty of things that need changing. So if you look at something in the security industry and you say, this is wrong, or we could do this better, best way to get it out there, get people thinking about it, doing something about it, give a talk.
Yeah. I really resonate with those last 2 points you made there. If we can zero in a little bit, maybe on the selfish aspect a little bit, it sounded like you were saying, in a way, it doesn't even necessarily matter if you give the best talk ever. Like I think so. I'm considering giving my first talk, and I recently had a call for papers accepted, and that'll be announced soon. So I'm pretty excited about it, but I'm also horrified. And the reality is that I could just blow it, right? Like I mean, there's always that possibility, and I think one of the fears that I have is like, what if I don't have the what if the material I'm presenting is only interesting in my brain, and for some reason like it's just not at all insightful or something like that. I'm just kind of speaking from inside my own inner monologue here. But can you talk a little bit about, I guess the importance of it really being like ultra impactful, or like how you would kind of guide someone to think through that for the first time?
So there's a few things to this. One is no one cares. The audience aren't judging you. The audience aren't going to condemn you if you slip or if you pause or if you run off the stage, because they'll be distracted by the next one. So that's the first thing. No one actually cares enough unless it's positive. That's what sticks in their head. There's also giving a talk forces you to think through what you're trying to deliver, and you may well, probably will, certainly with the first one, find the way that you think about it changing as you're preparing. And in terms of your first talk being bad, it won't be. If you don't set fire to the stage, you're probably all right. Particularly if it's at a security conference, people are very forgiving, very understanding, and have a sense of humor about these things. You do not need to be the best speaker in the world to get up on stage. The majority of people in the audience are unwilling to do it themselves, and there's an almost natural admiration for people who will. Even if you disagree with them, even if you don't think it was the best presentation, it's still something really courageous that you're doing, and it's something you care about, and that comes through.
Well, it's definitely comforting to hear you say that, and I think anyone who's either like preparing for their first talk or considering it, myself definitely included, should hear that and take it to heart. Does a cybersecurity talk need to be technical?
No, not at all. Security isn't about technology. Security is about people. Cybersecurity is still about people. There's just technology in the way. So you can talk about the technology, and that's fascinating to a lot of people in the audience, and it's fascinating to a right audience, but it doesn't have to be a purely technical talk. And often I've found the more human focused talks, even at the more technical conferences, have been the ones with the better response, because people identify with people, they understand those issues intrinsically. Technology talks are interesting, they're educational, but they don't really connect with anyone outside of that area in the same way. That's not to say people shouldn't do them. They're valuable, they're great things, but don't feel that you don't belong if you're not talking about some niche new vulnerability that you've uncovered.
Great, great. Um, what was the favorite talk that you ever gave?
There was one I gave just a few months ago now where I actually put it in under a false name with the permission of the organisers and gave it in disguise. And it was talking about people using false credentials, false profiles to build up followings and to borrow or steal credibility from other people in security and cybersecurity in particular. And it was just great fun, even though I had to shave for it.
Well, it looks like you're already back to true form, so that's a positive there. I actually did see that video. What was the title of that talk? Do you remember the exact title?
It was Verify Then Trust.
Verify Then Trust by James Bohr. I think I recall you taking off the hat and you had like some super tight bun and everything.
Yeah.
So I would encourage folks to check that out. It was a great talk. I had a feeling you would pick that one.
I nearly didn't get into the conference because they didn't recognize me.
I love that. They did not verify and then trust, or maybe they did in the end. Great stuff, man. So let's talk a little bit about what your tips and tricks, to a successful talk are. I don't know if you have just kind of a generic list that you like to go through with people, or we want to talk off the cuff, but this is where folks who are considering giving a talk might come specifically for value, right? So what are the secure the stage James Bohr kind of tips and tricks for delivering a successful cybersecurity talk?
So the first one is almost a mantra, and it's one that everyone I work with gets really fed up with, and then I find them reciting it 3 years later. And it's that it's not fear that you're feeling, it's excitement. So physiologically, the two sensations are indistinguishable. Fear and excitement, it's the same chemicals, it's the same reaction. So when you're feeling nervous about going on stage, it's not because you're scared of it, it's because you're excited, you feel you're doing something important, and you are doing something challenging. I tend to liken it to something like skydiving. People don't jump out of a plane because they're not scared about it, because they're not excited about it. They do it because it gives them that thrill. And speaking really has the same sort of impact.
And it doesn't have the possibility of an impact at the
It
end, which
Well,
makes it a little.
hopefully you have an impact, but not quite so literally. Yes.
That's great, man. Yeah, I like the fear and excitement thing. Does the mantra, and maybe you kind of said this in the way you said it and I missed it, but I can almost see the mantra, being used to like mentally leverage that fear, right? Because you're right, there's going to be fear, and it can be real fear, but perhaps it's more effective um, to leverage that fear, even though it's really fear, but like generate the excitement from it, or like turn
It's
it into excitement.
it's really excitement. You're just telling yourself it's fear. That's the problem. It's all about reframing. I mean, we have a lot of talk about social engineering and psychology in cybersecurity. That's exactly what you're doing here. You are changing the internal narrative to something that helps you rather than something that hinders you.
I like that. Social engineer yourself to give a better talk. I think there's a lot of validity there. What about when you're giving the talk? Is there anything, I mean, structurally or presentation wise, that you kind of cling to in your own talks that um, you think kind of elevates them to, a level that maybe they wouldn't be if you didn't do these things?
There's a number of different frameworks and structures I use depending on the audience and the topic and what I'm trying to the message and the change I'm trying to push through. The standard one is the kind of three-part act of prep people for it, give them the terms, give them the main body of it, and then give a summary at the end. And that just works really well. There's a reason that so many things are in three parts. It resonates with us as humans. There's some more practical stuff. Have a glass of water. If you feel yourself drying up, if you feel yourself pausing, take a sip of the water. It buys you time, buys you a good few seconds to think it through and catch up with yourself. There's speaking slowly. Slow down when you're giving a talk. Don't try and rush through it. There's various benefits. So, slowing down makes you sound more authoritative. It gives people time to process and understand what you're saying in a way that speeding up doesn't. There are times you might want to speed up, but most of the time, just slowing down your natural speaking pace will benefit you more and make it harder for you to race ahead of yourself. And then the other bit is not being too focused on any mistakes you make, because that's the spotlight effect coming in. You're inside your own head. You know when you said something that you didn't mean to or said something in the wrong way. Great news is the audience are not telepathic. They have no idea. You can correct it, you can cover it up, you can ignore it and move on, and no one else will know.
Great tips. Um, yeah, that's awesome. I think one of the other things that I don't know, I kind of felt like bringing in the word culture um, to the conversation, because I feel like there is like a security talk culture. I don't know if you have any thoughts around this, but some of the things that go through my brain when I think about security talk culture that may come into play when we're starting to like plan to give a talk or do our first talk or even our 100th talk, is maybe the venue you're in, whether it's virtual, whether it's at DEF CON versus, a vendor conference, right? Do you have any thoughts around the culture of like cybersecurity talks, or how that might play into, how you prepare?
So a lot does depend on the venue and the audience that you're speaking to. I would give a very different talk at DEF CON versus a vendor conference or a more commercial conference versus a B-sides, for example. And B-sides vary between different ones as well. So understanding who you're going to be talking to plays into how you might build it or prepare. That's not to say it has to, but as you gain more practice, as you gain more experience, you start to understand how to deliver a message to an audience better. The one I'm always challenged by is online talks, because with anything where you're standing in front of people, you can read the audience, see their responses, adjust on the fly, get some sort of feedback. With online talks, that doesn't exist, and it's terrifying to just talk to dead air and have no idea if people are nodding along or have gone to sleep or turned their cameras off and wandered off.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think for folks who are giving a virtual talk, do you feel like it's almost better to prepare as if you're giving, like you're about to record a video presentation versus, preparing for some sort of live talk?
Pretty much, unless it's very particular circumstances where it is more interactive, usually a small audience or where you might have some people able to leap in and ask questions and interact during it, you are giving a presentation. There's not a huge difference between if it's recorded or delivered live online, except whether you get a Q&A at the end.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting insight there. Um, let's see here. What are like how do you gauge a successful talk? So like, do you have any set of success criteria that, after a talk you sit down, do a retrospect, how did I do? um, is there any sort of James Bohr retrospect success criteria for a talk? Or I imagine maybe it's kind of dependent on the culture, the venue, where it's at, but any thoughts around that?
It is very much dependent on the venue, on the culture, but one of the big things that tells me I did well is when people come up and want to talk to me about the topic afterwards because they're interested in it or they've been thinking about it or they have further questions, because that turns it from a single talk I did into a whole conversation. And really, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to drive that change, that shift in people's thoughts about something. And if they're coming up to you, one or two or however many afterwards, and saying, "Yeah, I was just wondering about this," it's had an impact on them.
Very good. This kind of sparked my thought on something you had recently said, I think on LinkedIn or Twitter or something, that I wanted to get your live thoughts on, and maybe just to repeat it. But you had brought up the thought about mingling with the audience before a talk. I was wondering if maybe you could restate that and expand upon that a little bit.
That's a cheat code. So if you go into the audience beforehand, obviously don't do it if it's one of these sessions where you're just going to have 30 seconds before the next talk or 30 seconds between the previous talk and yours. But if you've got time, if you've got a few minutes, meet and greet, because it makes you human and people are more interested in listening to someone they know talk. So you will get more focus, you will get more attention, and you're going to be on stage as the speaker. That makes you, for that at least short window of time, the expert and possibly a bit of a celebrity. I might be overstating there, but people like to meet someone and then see them do something impressive. So doing that just helps to win goodwill, it helps to win grace, and it helps to make sure they'll be more engaged in the talk because they know you.
Right. And tying this back all to, I believe the second bullet point you said, about, why you should give a talk, and that kind of, um, perhaps somewhat selfish, like brand building, career perspective, meeting people and kind of, building that recognition. I mean, that's really what it's all about, right? Unless perhaps you're a vendor, or like employed by a vendor attempting to sell a product, like I would say almost 100% of speakers are there to make connections and kind of, impress people in some way, shape, or form.
I'd say even the vendors. I mean, if you're trying to sell a product, then you want to be having conversations. You want to be building those relationships. So it's almost always going to be your not necessarily trying to impress, you're trying to engage. You are trying to shift how people think, and you're trying to engage with them over it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there is no exception for the vendor thing. I think it's equal parts important and something to consider. Um, all right. Well, I think all of this has been very insightful for the conference world. My day job, I'm a corporate guy, and I spend a lot of time in my meetings and preparing internal presentations. Oftentimes they're virtual. Um, I'm wondering if you had any insights or specific kind of parallels you could draw to giving a corporate presentation versus an information security talk. So, the audience may or may not be technical, but now you're kind of bringing it in to, the environment of your company, and you're trying to achieve certain objectives with whatever talk you may be giving. How do you view these two things in parallel? Are they the same, similar? Kind of throwing a lot at you here, but your thoughts on applying, these kind of concepts we just talked about to the corporate world.
It's the same skill set. It's all about that communication, that engagement. You will change the way that you present if it's a corporate presentation versus a B-sides after party. Maybe a few less jokes, although I'd still include humor. And you may change what you're trying to achieve, but you're still trying to get some sort of shift in mindset. You're trying to persuade and convince people. Even when you're educating people, you're trying to convince them to think about something differently or consider something more. So it is the same principles. It is the same skill set. You can learn how to give a good presentation in a boardroom by going out and giving a talk in a conference or anywhere else, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, perhaps one interesting thing to pull from that is if you do have aspirations to, like, I don't know, move vertically in a corporate setting, perhaps considering giving a talk at a smaller conference or whatever conference on something that you feel like you have something to provide value to, uh, isn't just something that you can contribute to your industry or to your ego or whatever it may be. It's ultimately also contributing to the skill sets you need to develop to move into that role that you might be considering, going for in a year or two.
Yeah, I mean, let's say you're trying to move into, I don't know, a GRC role from a SOC position. You go and give a talk about a particular standard, how it might be implemented, the consequences of it. And when you're trying to move into that new position, oh, look, I've spoken about this, I had engagement, I've had conversations, I've thought it through, and I've learned. That's going to save you a lot of time in the interview itself.
Yeah, and can we talk about how taking the plunge and committing to a talk topic makes you, it forces you to learn. Like, your example there is a really great example. Let's just consider next year I want to, like, I'm really aspiring to be, I don't know, a CISO or a GRC analyst. It's not something I have very much experience in. And in fact, maybe this also is a really great tip for folks. The whole breaking into cybersecurity thing is a huge topic on the internet, but I don't want to focus in on that, but it's also applicable there. I mean, you could choose today to give a talk in 6 months, 8 months, a year on something that maybe today you don't even have a ton of knowledge on, but by kind of doing the fear excitement thing in your brain and saying, this is something I really want to learn. I want to learn the NIST framework, and I'm going to tell people about it by the end of my learning time. Um, do you feel that talks can be a vehicle of, like, forced study or, like, career pivoting and potential in that way?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't remember what the exact quote is, but it's something along the lines of, if you want to understand a subject, teach it. It forces you to consider it, to look at it from other people's points of view, to research around it. in a way that you don't necessarily have to do unless you're using it daily. Even then, you might not understand it, just use it. So, committing to give a talk on a topic is a great way to make yourself learn it and understand it enough to be able to explain it to other people.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's kind of like a low key point for people to take away that could provide a massive amount of value if it was applied more often in everyday situations. And perhaps it's just that fear is overwhelming of the talk, right? And people needing to apply that fear and excitement mantra a little bit more to push themselves to learn something, and so on. So I think that's really good. The last question, unless we were having a really great conversation, so I really appreciate this. We may think of plenty of other things to talk about, maybe not, but you mentioned humor. I was wondering what role humor plays in a cybersecurity talk.
A huge amount. People like to chuckle, they like to laugh. It disarms them, it wakes people up. When you've been going on for 20 minutes about some very niche technical area, a joke is just that quick kick to the attention. So it's a great way, again, to engage with people and to relax things. Now, that's not to say it's appropriate for all talks. There are definitely some where you don't want to go anywhere near humor. But if you can, lightening the mood makes a big difference. And it doesn't have to be an explicit joke. It can just be some area of what you're talking about that's a bit weird, a bit funny, naturally humorous. But don't take yourself too seriously. That's only going to hurt when you're on stage.
Yeah, it seems to be a theme, and a lot of people who have talked about how to give a good talk, often when they're giving the talk on how to give a good talk, it's laced with humor, and I think some self-depreciation, right? Like some self-humor. So again, I think that's just another point to take away of, consider looping that in there. I think the attention grabbing piece is something that I think, if you're droning on about a technical concept, especially if it's like an hour long talk, for instance, an hour of straight, ones and zeros, I think even, the most technical people might start getting a little tired. And again, going back to the venue setting, right? If it's virtual, it sounds to me almost like it's a necessity. And just speaking from experience, I think vendors need to do this more. I mean, I can't think of how many webinars or things I've sat through, just kind of had on in the background or something eventually, because it was just a little dry.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, if you're doing a webinar, you're demonstrating something, the live demo joke always works.
You'll have to educate me on that one.
So the tradition is that no live demo ever works well. You just play into that as you start it, have a backup, have one recorded in case it actually doesn't work. But just lean into I'm taking a risk by trying a live demo during a talk. It always gets a laugh. I've seen it every time it's used, and it means if it doesn't work, well, it's just a bit funny. It's not frustrating. It's less awkward.
Oh, that's a good one, actually. I could see that being very effective, and it's got utility as well, which is I guess double value there. Well, James, I think this has been a really great conversation. I know I've personally gotten some free advice, kind of selfishly for my upcoming talk, and I hope all the listeners as well took some value out of our conversation. Was there anything that we didn't touch on today, or any kind of final thoughts on, cybersecurity talks, or things in this realm that you feel strongly about that we didn't touch?
If you're considering putting something in for a CFP, just put it in. Don't worry about having the talk fully written out, fully developed, because then you'll never get round to it. Put in the topic and then start working on it. Ideally, once it's accepted, but if it's accepted 2 days beforehand, you might want to give a bit more notice. But don't wait until you've got the talk, got the presentation before you propose it, because that's just a way to procrastinate and delay, and you fall into the perfectionism trap where until it's 100%, you don't want to do it, and it's never going to be 100%.
That's a really great point. I think I fooled myself for the longest time thinking that everyone who ever spoke at a conference submitted a 30, slide PowerPoint and, had to give a demo of their talk before it was accepted. But the reality is that it's not like that at all.
Yeah, it's usually, almost always, there are exceptions, but it's a short proposal, paragraph at most, maybe an outline, and it's not like you're signing, unless you're being paid to give the talk. You're not signing a contract promising you will deliver it exactly like that. You can evolve it and change it as you go. So it's quite light, they're quite easy to just put in and then develop afterwards.
Yeah. I'm really glad we touched on that at the end because along with just the generic fear of speaking in front of people, I think there's also a barrier of entry that people face with CFPs that are almost self-constructed or just not understood, and they're artificial barriers, right? Because, like I said, I mean, perhaps it's just a lack of education on my part, but I feel like I'm neither way above the average or hopefully not, below the average of the cyber professionals out there. So I can't imagine I'm the only one who kind of felt that was a roadblock.
So one thing that I often say to people who are brand new to both the industry and giving a talk, consider what would have been useful for you to hear 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, 6 days ago, because guarantee there's people out there who want to hear it.
Wow, that's a powerful tool. That is a really powerful tool. So if you're sitting here and you're thinking, I want to give a talk, I don't know what to do, but I know I want to push myself. It's something I need to do in my career, in my life. That's a really powerful like brainstorming exercise. And I imagine you could also like expand that to your network. And, if there's people you trust or you're just friendly with, what's something that you learned 3 months ago that you thought was valuable or you wish you knew, or I really like that. Awesome, man. This is good. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. Thanks again so much, James, for agreeing to be on the show. I know, this is officially episode 3 of the reboot, bringing back to life of Infosec Sidekick, and I think this is a great topic for people, and I really hope people are getting value out of this. I wanted to give you some time at the end to give yourself a little plug. Where can people find you? What are you doing these days? And then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, so I'm still doing consultancy, an awful lot of audit and implementation work, but I do have people to help me with that now, and that's all under BORS. The thing I'm really working on is speaking and helping people to speak or to improve their speaking, and that's all under Secure the Stage. And I am working on bringing out or developing a fund to help new speakers, to help them travel to events, to help them get training that they might need, help with slides, whatever they might need. That's still in the early days, but it is forming up.
Very cool. James Bohr, thank you so much for all the advice and the conversation on this topic. I'm going to do my best to put as many links and things in the descriptions of everything wherever you're listening to this. So go find James, and best of luck on your next information security talk.
Thank you, and good luck with yours.
Thank you.